teaching ministry of Bob Hylands. Let us join Pastor Bob as he shares today's lesson.
This morning, I want to talk to you, and I'm going to put it to you this way. I want to share with you an infomercial. A Sunday morning message infomercial about the next year, what we're going to be doing, and how you can be involved. And you can be involved in all different levels. But I think this morning I can help you get ready for it and set the stage for where we're going for the next, actually 53 weeks after this one. We'll go from the first Sunday of next year all the way through the first Sunday of the following year, what we're going to be doing. And so in the process of doing that, I want to bring you and challenge you this morning. And like I said, it's an infomercial. I'm going to say some things more than once because I want to drill them into you. I want you to get the point of what I'm trying to say. But I want to start with a scripture from the book of 2 Corinthians here this morning. And the scripture from 2 Corinthians is Paul is talking to that church. And that church is a difficult church. Remember, this is still only a few years after Jesus Christ has died. It was within 30 years of his death. This is a church that has 10 major problems in it. The 1 Corinthians is all about it. Here's 2 Corinthians. He's writing to them. And he writes to this church, he says, you happily put up with whatever anyone tells you. You know, that may be good as far as getting along with family members, but I tell you, that's not great when your theology is based upon just what anybody says. He says, even if they preach a different Jesus. Now, you may not think about it, but there are many Jesuses, but there's only one real Jesus. And I think it's important for all of you to understand and see that this morning, that there's a lot of preaching today about different Jesuses going on. Teaching us that Jesus is all these different things in all these different ways, when the truth is, Jesus Christ, there's only one. He talked about a different kind of spirit. I listened to religious leaders from Catholic to Protestant to evangelical speak about these what Jesus Christ represents and what the church represents this week, and I thought, wow, I think that some of them have failed to do one thing, and that's read the New Testament. And then he talks about a different gospel. And in the time we live, the gospel has been changed. The word gospel means good news, and the good news now has become a social construct that is all about whether you're feeding the hungry, or the good news is about whether or not you're being kind to someone, or whether you're putting up, that you're not being politically incorrect to anybody. People have made that the gospel of Jesus Christ. The gospel of Jesus Christ is about salvation and a born-again experience and discovering what it means to live your life for Him. But this different Jesus and this different spirit and this different gospel, they can be dealt with. And that's what I want to talk to you about, because I really believe if you go to the Word of God and you take time looking what Jesus did and what Jesus said and all the things that Jesus covered in His life, you and I can all know better who Jesus really is. Who is Jesus, and why are we looking for Him in the Seeking Jesus series? Well, I want to talk about that for a minute. But first, I would like to take you into two illustrations that lap up with each other a whole lot. The first one is from a book which came out a number of years ago called Good to Great. If you've ever read Jim Collins' books, he's writes for businesses. It's a red book. It's got giant letters on the front. I've read it a couple times. And Jim Collins talks about, in his book, Good to Great, a 20-mile march principle. Now, Jim Collins is writing about business. He's writing about Coca-Cola and Boeing and big companies and what they've done to make it traditional companies. And he studied these companies for the last 100 years, up to the time of his book, to find out which companies had had a long-term success, which companies had had quick success and failed or hadn't made it. And he discovered that in all these businesses that were really great big businesses that have been successful, that they had two principles in mind. And he talked about them, and he talked about in this 20-mile march, the two principles, he called them discomfort levels. Now, all of a sudden, some of you are going like, wait a minute, Pastor, I don't want discomfort levels. I just want to be nice and soft and everything all right. But be honest, folks, we live in a world full of discomfort. It comes to us all the time. And we're about to enter a year where I'm asking you to take a journey and make a commitment, and I'm going to tell you right now, the discomfort's going to be there. The distractions are going to be there. The things that are going to be to stop you. And so he talks about these two discomfort levels that these businesses do, and which I'm going to bring into your lives in just a minute. The first one of these is you must be willing to reach your goal in the most difficult times and circumstances. Now, I want you to think about it. these businesses which have been successful over a period of time have had to succeed through wars, through depressions, through downturns in the economy, through manufacturing changes, through social changes, and somehow they've had to stay on track to be successful businesses. And so they've had to maintain their goals through some of the most difficult times when it might be easier to change directions. Now, right now, a company just north of here is in one of those difficult times. It's called Boeing. And we all know that Boeing has had two major setbacks recently with their big MAX airplane being grounded because of problems on it. And I could go into a lot of reasons for that as I've read about it recently, but everybody seems to have an opinion, but nobody really knows for sure. And then the second thing is they just tried to shoot a rocket up and it didn't work, and it was Boeing's rocket, and so that all happened within a week, and so the president of the company got fired. It's so sad he only got $24 million when they fired him. Yeah, so it was tough on him, you know. He'll probably have to go out and get a part-time job to keep things going in his home, so. But difficult times. Companies go through those difficult times. I believe Boeing will make it through. They're a big company that has overall goals to build airplanes so that people can fly in the air. And I think they've proved that they can do it. They've been through difficult times before. They'll go through it again. But right now it's one of those difficult, but they've got to maintain their goal and their focus if they're going to make it through. The second one is you must hold back or not overreach even the most ideal or best of times. If you read Jim Collins' book, Great by Choice, you'll discover that one of the things that happens in some companies is they start succeeding and they overextend themselves, believing they can do more and more, and they get outside of where they're supposed to be, and the company gets where they shouldn't be. Now, let me tell you about a company who didn't keep up with the times and overextended and then had to pull back. It's a company called Kmart. We all remember Kmart. We used to have one here in town. But what happened to Kmart? Kmart overextended themselves and even went so far as believing that buying Sears, a failing company, was going to help them. The Sears is a whole other story. Sears did not stay on track for what they needed to do or keep up with the changing times they were in and did not have the focus they should have had. But here's Kmart, and they overextended themselves, and they kept going out and out and out, believing that if they got all this, if they got big enough, that was all they had to do. Being big enough is not the answer. You all know what happened to Kmart. There's still a couple of them left. Our Sears is closing. Our Kmart's been gone for years. But you have to understand there are two things. You have to be careful that when things are going good, you don't overextend. You don't go too far. The other thing is that if times are difficult, that you don't give up or let the difficult times stop you. I'm going to give you an example of this in just a minute, how it works. But first, I want to share with you about a time long ago. The time is 1911. And let me tell you about 1911 for a minute. The year 1911 is very different than the time we live in now. The average life expectancy for someone living in America was 47 years. Fuel for automobiles was sold only in drugstores. You had to go into the drugstore to get your fuel for your car. 14% of the homes had a bathtub. I don't know how many people had indoor plumbing, but it's probably less than that. 8% of the homes had a telephone. That's probably true now, too, because everybody's got cell phones. There were only 8,000 cars and 144 miles of paved road in the entire country. The maximum speed limit in most cities was 10 miles an hour. That's what it is in front of the highway, yeah. The tallest structure in the world was the Eiffel Tower. The average U.S. wage was 22 cents an hour. The average U.S. worker made between $200 and $400 a year. A competent accountant would make about $2,000 a year, a dentist $2,500 a year, a veterinarian between $1,500 and $4,000 per year, and a mechanical engineer was on the top of the list making about $5,000 per year. More than 95% of all the births in the country took place in your home. 90% of all doctors had no college education, had been trained in medical schools that many in the press called substandard or dangerous. Sugar cost 4 cents a pound. Eggs were 14 cents a dozen. They'd just gone up from 12 cents a dozen. People were upset because it was so expensive. Coffee, for you who care about coffee, I'm not one of them, was 15 cents a pound. Most women, this is disturbing, ladies, you can cover your ears if you want. Most women only wash their hair once a month, and either they use borax or egg yolk as shampoo. Canada passed a law that prohibited poor people from entering their country for any reason. And they criticize us, huh? The 5 leading causes of death were pneumonia and the flu was number 1. Tuberculosis was number 2. Diarrhea was number 3. Heart disease was number 4. And stroke was number 5. The American flag had 45 stars. The population of Las Vegas, Nevada in 1911 was 30 people. The next part is kind of disturbing to me, things that had not yet been invented. I don't care about the first ones. Crossword puzzles, they didn't exist yet. Okay? I don't care. I don't like crossword puzzles anyway. Canned beer. Well, I don't care what type of beer it is. I don't care. I don't like it. But the next one, they had not invented iced tea yet. I start every morning with iced tea. Those people were uncivilized in every way. There was neither a Mother's Day nor a Father's Day in 1911. 2 out of every 10 adults could not read, and only 6% of the population had graduated from high school. Marijuana, heroin, morphine were all available over the counter at the local drugstore. Coming to America soon, the way we're going. Back then, pharmacists said of heroin, and I quote, "Heroin clears the complexion, gives buoyancy to the mind, regulates the stomach and bowels, as in fact a perfect guardian of health." That's how they advertised it. No wonder they were dying at 47 years old. 18% of the household had at least one full-time domestic help. There were 230 reported murders in the entire U.S. There was no gun control, and everybody owned a gun. Think about it. And no human had ever been to the South Pole. People weren't flying in airplanes. Boats were steam-powered at the most at this particular point. Going across the Atlantic could be a dangerous thing. It would only be a few years. It was at this particular point in time. You remember that the Titanic and all those ships go down. And 2 men, Robert Scott and Roald Amundsen, had made a choice that they were going to take expeditions to be the first people at the South Pole. It was a big thing. It's like going to the moon. It's like going to Mars in that days. The first people to do it. And the year is 1911. So let's talk about this expedition for a minute and these 2 men. They were going to go to a place called the South Pole, Antarctica. Not the Arctic, the Antarctic. And so their goal to go to the South Pole was set up, and both of them were racing against time and each other and the elements to be the first one there. Now, we'll talk about these 2 men in just a minute, but the routes are, the red route here is the one that Amundsen took. It's a shorter route. It is a brand new route that's being taken. It had never been taken before. It's a closer route. The one that Scott is taking is the same route that Shackleton tried to take. Shackleton's expedition was a total disaster. They only because Shackleton had some miracles happen in his place did he get his people out alive. But one of the people on Shackleton's expedition that was a total failure was a man named Scott, who's doing this expedition. So he knows everything that's going to happen there. He's been there. He's seen it. He's seen the worst that could happen. And so he's heading one of the expeditions. The other one is he's a British naval officer. And so the other one is a Norwegian, Amundsen, who is just a civilian who has put together this expedition by himself with help of family and friends. He's made some minor expeditions in the Arctic region. He is well known for the things he has been able to do. He has been studying and planning for this and getting ready for it, while Robert Scott has just been dreaming about it, not really getting ready for it. So let's talk about Robert Scott and his plan. Now, Robert Scott's plan is logistical nightmare, to say the least. His expedition will have, to go to the pole and back, will have 16 men, 23 dogs, 10 ponies, 13 sleds, and 2 motor sleds, or that have never been used before. Since he sets up all those different forms of transportation, he's taking ponies because ponies were what Shackleton took. He's taking the new motor sleds because he thinks they're the latest things. They have just been built for him. They've never ever been in sub-zero, below 32 degrees, let alone in temperatures 5, 10, 15 below zero. And so he's got these sleds, he's got the dogs. By the way, he has 23 dogs, but he doesn't have anybody in his team who knows how to drive dogs, run a dog sled. Now, let me tell you about ponies for just a second. Ponies, which you see here, these are actual pictures of his ponies from his expedition. Ponies, none of the food that the ponies need grows in Antarctica, in the Antarctic. They need hay, they need large amounts of water. The only way you can get water is you have to heat it up and boil it. You chop up the ice and do it. It means you have to have all this extra fuel for the water. You have to bring in everything the horses eat. The horses, after they pulled all day long, are covered with sweat. When they stand at night, they freeze. I feel sorry for the horses in this picture because none of them made it past a couple weeks. In the upper corner, I want you to see that they are what's called man-hauling. Man-hauling means that they didn't know how to use the horses, so the horses all died. They didn't know how to use a dog, so they just set the dogs loose. They didn't know how to, the sleds they had only worked for about 3 or 4 days at the most, and then they froze up and had mechanical breakdowns because they'd never been tested. They brought them to Antarctica to be the key part to get there, but they broke down. And then, so they had to do what's called man-hauling. Now, can you imagine going about 1,600 miles in sub-zero temperature like this? That's what they were planning to do. It's the same plan that Shackleton had, and Shackleton's failed. Shackleton wasn't even to get halfway to the pole because of the weather. His ponies died. He didn't have sleds. He didn't know how to use dogs. They ended up man-hauling, and they failed, just so you know that. And here's a man who's heading this expedition who was there for the whole thing, and he says, let's do it that way again. I'm glad that I'm not part of his expedition. Everything Scott did had already failed. But he believed by the way, I remind you, he's a British naval officer. Everything he did, it was, if I do it harder and I try harder, it will work. Because nothing I do can fail, even if it has failed before. That was his attitude. He made no preparations overall. He went to parties while he was raising his money. He didn't even know whether his men could do the job they were supposed to do. He took people along who were unqualified in every way because somebody would give him money and say, will you take my friend along? Well, I think they must have known that he was going to fail. He said, I don't like this guy. I'm going to send him to the Arctic and let him die. I mean, it was about it. And then you have Amundsen. Totally different. He is a man who believed that you have to prepare if you're going to do something like this. Now, Amundsen's expedition was only 5 men with skis, 52 dogs, 4 sleds, all the way there and back. Oh, I have to tell you one more thing about Scott that I forgot to tell you a minute ago. Half his men had snowshoes. Half his men didn't have snowshoes. Some of his men had skis, but nobody knew how to use them, and the other half didn't. So when he set out, whenever he first started, he sent the sleds out, the snow sleds out first, and then he sent out the ponies next because they were faster, and the dogs goes, and then some people walked. It was all confused how they put them out, and he had to stagger his men going out across the snow. Amundsen, quite different. Amundsen used dogs. In fact, he had these 52 dogs, and he brought dogs because dogs are completely different than ponies. Dogs eat seals. They eat fish. They eat dry food. You don't have to bring anything there because seals and fish are all available. When they arrive, they begin gathering the dog food, gathering them up, freezing it, and preparing it so they could take it out and put it at their depots, which we'll talk about in a minute. So Amundsen has dogs, and dogs also, one more thing, which is kind of tough for dog lovers, but dogs also eat meat, and dogs are made out of meat. So if you really got in desperate situation, you could feed the dogs to the dogs. He also designed a dry dog food for them that was also edible for human beings that contained vitamins, which will be important. He designed tents, which we don't have a picture of here, which we'll see in a minute. He designed tents. He designed the first pop-up tents. Very simple tents, very easy tents to use. In fact, if you go to REI today and you see one of those pop-up tents, he had the first idea for that. His aren't quite that neat, but that's the same thing. While Robert Scott took along British tents that had been used in the jungles of Africa and used those, it took about 2 hours to set up your tents. It took Amundsen about 10 minutes to set up his tents. So Amundsen also designed, and see at the far end there, his sled with the boxes on. That's his supply boxes. Whenever he got to a camp, he designed it after he called a British tea tin, except it was bigger. You just got to the camp, pop your top off, got your supplies, closed it up, and you were done. While Scott had used the old type where you had to unload the entire sled, dig through to get your stuff, take your time to set up your tents. It was a disaster. Now Amundsen group, and this is a picture of Amundsen right there, by the way, the second from the left over there. And this is all Eskimo gear. One of the things he did in preparing for his trip to the Antarctic was he went to the Arctic Circle, and he got with the Eskimos, and he lived with them a while, and he discovered all sorts of key things that he needed to know, including what their gear was and why it worked. In a minute, we'll tell what's so special about that. But a little side note here, something that really bothered me when I read the book about this, the Last Place on Earth, which is a great book about this. When he was up there, one of the greatest things they could do, one of the things they kept most secret, the Eskimos did, was their underwear. Special Arctic underwear. And he became such good friends that one day they took him in a tent and took off their underwear and gave it to him, and he had to put it on and wear it. But he said that he learned a lot from them because he spent time with them. He learned how to run dogs. In fact, when he went to the South Pole, he had 5 men. 2 of them were the best skiers in the world. 2 of them were experts in running dogs. And they trained each other when they first got there how to do it. In fact, they worked on the boat on it. And so Amundsen's plan was he was going to work in advance. He was going to make sure that everything was prepared. He worked out the details. He took the best of what had existed. He took the best of what was new. He put it together and he said, I can succeed. I can do this. So his plan was simple and straightforward, but he always had his goal in mind. And remember, Scott was basing his upon a failed plan, and Amundsen was basing his upon, I would say, with using the Eskimos and everybody else, a plan that had already succeeded, just on a smaller scale. He was going to go to the South Pole using the best technology, old and new, to get there that he could. Now, along the way, they had to, when they first got there, they had to go out part way and set up a supply depot and come back. They'd go out and take more supplies further, and they did this so it would cover about half their trip. Now, when Scott did this, by the way, this is Amundsen's group right here, because Scott's boxes didn't look this good. Scott, when he went out, he used the same containers for the fuel and that Shackleton used. Shackleton's containers all leaked, lost most of the fuel. That's the one Scott did. Amundsen said, I don't think I like that plan. So he designed new containers that would hold the fuel that wouldn't leak. So you would go out and set up these depots on the ice, on the flat ice of Antarctica, and when they set up the depots on the flat ice of Antarctica, what did Scott do? Scott did the same thing Shackleton did. He put up one flag on top of the depot. You can see it, and it's not very big, some of these flags, because they're flapping in the wind. He put up one flag, and Scott believed that he could find it. Well, if you've ever been in a blizzard anywhere, imagine a blizzard in a flat area with fog and blizzard and everything, trying to find one of these depots. So one of the problems Scott had was, as he looked for his depots, he had to zigzag back and forward and slowed himself down on the ice. On top of that, he was now man-hauling because his dogs didn't work. His ponies had died. His sleds had broken down. And so he's pulling back and forward, looking for his depots. And he had figured that with the sleds and the ponies, he could be there in a shorter period of time. He figured he could do 20 to 30 miles a day. He was doing 7 or 8 miles a day, which we'll talk about in a second. But contrast that with Amundsen's plan for his depots. And this is important for something I'm going to share with you in a minute. Amundsen's depots were set up, and he put flags out every half mile on either side for 2.5 miles. So he's covered this big 5-mile area. So guess what? If you miss the depot, what do you still got a chance of doing? You hit one of the flags are marked, and you know that this color flag is on this side of the depot, this color flag is on this side of the depot, you can get into your depot. So he just went across the ice. Boom, let's go. The difference is immense. Because one man has a goal, but he's also set up the safety nets on both sides to make sure that he doesn't get lost. The other man is struggling every step of the way. Now, I want to say the two explorers were very different. And before everything comes up here, I want to remind you about the two explorers being very different. Amundsen's plan was to average between 18 and 22 miles a day. Wait a minute, what's the rule, what you stick for? That's a Jim Collins rule, 20 miles a day. Well, that's the average between. That was his goal to make it. By the way, that was Scott's goal, but Scott averaged 7 or 8 miles a day when he traveled, when he had the opportunity to travel. So it meant that he took him almost 3 times as long or twice as long to get to his goals as he thought it should. You must be willing to reach your goal no matter the most difficult times and circumstances. Amundsen had only about 4 or 5 days when he stayed in his tent and he didn't get out no matter how bad the weather was. But the days he was in his tent, you know what he did? Amundsen very clearly had all his men working and repairing gear and working. Scott, who had been here before, complained in his diary again and again that the weather was so terrible and not being kind to him. It's almost like he was thinking that God was mad at him. Yet, when you look at the forecast and the weather information they both put down, Amundsen had far more bad weather than Scott did, but Scott had almost 3 times or 4 times as many days he stayed in his tent and did nothing. The difference is terrible for them. When it was difficult, Amundsen said, we're going to go through. When it was difficult, Scott said, oh, I just got to quit. I just can't do it today. We'll try tomorrow. I can't imagine being in Antarctica with somebody who didn't have a goal to get there and get out, because I don't like cold weather that much. And this is really cold weather. The second principle that made the explorers different, remember, Collins said you must hold back and not overreach even in the most ideal of times. Whenever Scott did go, because his men were man-hauling and he was always behind schedule, he would drive them to exhaustion. He'd get up early in the morning and he'd go all day long, late into the night, and then when they arrived at their campsite, they would have to unload the sleds, put up the tents 2 hours, they'd have to get the fuel, they'd have to boil the water so that for a little bit when they had the dogs that they took along, and then finally for themselves, and it took them forever. Then he would let them sleep 2 or 3 hours, get up, take down the tents another 2 hours, get the food, load everything up, and go, and they go. And finally, even in good weather, they finally drive his men to exhaustion, so they have to stop on good days. Amundsen said, you know what? It may be good weather, but we're only going our 20 miles. We're only going to do what we have to. We've got a goal. We're going to make it through. We do 20 miles on bad days. We do 20 miles on good days. We hold the course. See, he had a plan. He knew what it was going to take to get there. Amundsen stuck to the plan, and he always rested. Even when they came to the pole, it's important, when he was just a short distance from the pole, when they knew it, his men said, let's push on. He said, no. On the return trip, when Amundsen was coming back, he was 40 miles away before he broke this principle for anyone. And he had 2 sleds by that point, because he had narrowed down the number of dogs and his 2 men on his sled. And he was out front, by the way. He went out in front of led his men on the skis. And so, with only 40 miles to go, he allowed his 2 teams to take off. He said, okay, you guys go, and you can race home. And they made it in a day and a half, one beating the other by a couple hours. And then he came in late that evening. But he has held the 2 principles that we learned from Jim Collins now also applied back then. When it's bad, you have to keep going. And when it's easy, you have to be careful that you don't overextend yourself. Now, this has principles that we'll look at in a second that apply to you and I. Now, Amundsen, he arrived at the South Pole on December 14th, stayed through the 17th, 1911, spent his 3 days there. I want to point out a couple things about the 3 days he was there very quickly. When he arrived at the South Pole, he put up one of his pop-up tents. He put up a flag. You can't see it real clearly here. That is a Norwegian flag at the top. And so he did that, he put it up, and while they were there for 3 days, taking all their readings, making sure they were at the South Pole, he also had a couple of his men go out and began putting up flags a half mile around. and put a circle of flags all the way around because he wanted to make sure of two things: that anybody who came couldn't go a half mile away and say, "Oh, I didn't see it," and claim they'd got to the South Pole. He also wanted to make sure that when Scott got there, Scott knew that he got there first. He even left supplies there that Scott could use. And then he left and started home. And even on the return trip, even when they had good weather, even when they know they made it, they stuck to their 20-mile rule: good weather or bad weather. And as they drove home, they were extremely excited because they were the first people to get to the South Pole. Remember Scott? Scott started later. Worse weather should have been his, but it wasn't. Scott decided that he was going to go to the South Pole. Scott arrived on January 17th. It should be 1912. I put 2012, okay? He just got there. He's getting there, okay. I just realized what I put up. Okay. Did I do the other one right? Check here, see. Oh, he was right. So Scott got there 100 years later. Okay, no, just joking. I had 2020 on my mind, I got to tell you. I want you to notice a couple things about this picture. The people standing around, there's no joy here. There really isn't. That tent was Amundsen's tent. He left it there. I want you to look at the flag on the top. That is not a British flag. That is a Norwegian flag flying, yet Scott had to have his picture taken with the Norwegian flag because it was already there. He was defeated. They spent that day and part of the next day and started back. They were in trouble the whole time on the way back because they were man-hauling. They were already exhausted. They had broken several rules, key rules that a British naval officer should have known. By the way, do you know that there's a nickname for British naval personnel? Does anybody know what that name is, real quick? They're called limeys. They're called limeys for a reason. A doctor for the British Navy discovered that if you gave a sailor a lime on a regular basis, that he would not become sick. They did not know at the point it was because of vitamin C deficiency. Scott made no plans in any way to take care of those nutritional needs of his men. By the time they reached the South Pole, they were suffering from scurvy because of lack of vitamin C. They were suffering from brain fog, severe brain fog, because they had no vitamin B in their diet. Both those things had been built into the diet, even though he didn't know what they were. He knew what he needed to do. Amundsen had those things in the things he was eating. And so Scott's men were sick, delirious, struggling even to be able to think in any way. So they spent that time, they started back. As they started back across it, they had to hurry. The first distance was a straight one-fourth the distance was with no supply depots. When he started getting close to where supply depots were, he had to start zigzagging because he couldn't remember exactly where he was. That slowed him down. Now his men are starving, sometimes because of lack of fuel. They're dehydrated because they have to get to the next depot to get fuel. When they get there, they discover there wasn't enough fuel because it had leaked out. It's a disaster. So one man became ill. They left him behind in a tent, said, "We'll come back and get you." That wasn't going to happen. They finally came to a point where they stopped. They were so tired and sick they couldn't do anymore. They were writing in their journals. One man got up one morning after they'd been there a couple days. He said, "I'll see you later," walked out the tent and was never seen again. He's never been found. Scott and the men who were remaining laid in their tents and wrote their diaries at that particular point until Scott wrote his last entry, and they all died there in their tents. The last entry was on March 29th, 1912. Their bodies were found the next year in their sleeping bags. The difference between their two plans is immense. One man planned and got it right, and he stuck to the 20-mile rule. The other man got everything wrong, and he tried to do the things the way we've always done it. So let me bring this into light for all of us here this morning. In 2020, we're going to cover the life and teachings of Jesus. And we have an ultimate one-year goal of seeking Jesus, covering every event in the life of Jesus there is. And so that flag's way out there. That's the flag. That's what we're going to do. We're going to cover all the events in the life of Jesus. And along the way, we've got what I call supply depots. We've got 4 of these. Each quarter, 13 weeks, we're going to give you a journal, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Or you can buy a journal. If you don't want to participate, that's up to you. Now, our weekly journeys are going to cover, my part of it with you is in particular is going to be Sundays and Wednesdays events. And then you have a memory verse that we'll talk about as we go through the process with you. But Sunday mornings, every Sunday morning I come in and preach from the scriptures you're going to be doing that week. Every Wednesdays, you that come, we're going to talk about those scriptures and answer questions and give you more details about them. You have a daily snapshot that you'll take each day in your journal. But if you come next week, I'll tell you what snapshot, how I got it, and why it's the most successful program you can do. Well marked to keep you on track and keep you from getting lost. If you'll follow the plan and stay with us day after day, week after week, we'll get you through this. It's like being on Amundsen's plan, and the reason I say that is because we're not going to go too fast, we're not going to go too slow. Now, when I talk about this 20 miles, we're going to talk about snapshot journaling for just a minute. Your daily snapshot journal is the key, what you do every day. Remember what you must be willing, Collins says, to reach your goal in the most difficult times. This is the daily commitment that needs to be covered an entire year. Now, it took them a year to get to the South Pole and back. It's going to take us a year to go through the life of Jesus Christ. But here's what I want you to know. There are going to be days when things go wrong in your life. Are you going to have a devotion with God? You're going to do your snapshot journal. You're going to stay on track. Or are you going to be like Amundsen and you're going to go, oh, today I just can't do it. It's too tough. The wind's blowing. Folks, I started by telling you, life is coming at you this year. I know it. There are going to be those days when you're going to go like, oh my goodness, do I have to do this? And the answer is yes. If you want to make it through, you want to be successful. And the other part is, when you're doing your journaling, you must hold back or not overreach even the most ideal of times. Again and again, Amundsen's men said, let's go double today. Let's go triple today. And he had learned from the Eskimos that if you push yourself too much and you sweat, you're in trouble and you never recover from it. Here's what I want you to know. On Sundays, we're giving you this picture of this much, and every day we're going to take a little bit of it and get you through it. And so the goal here is that I'm going to show you the content and the context, and then every day you're going to start and just take a little piece of it and add it to your life and grow on it. You know, if you eat too much and you gorge yourself like most of us did recently at Thanksgiving and Christmas, that's not good for you. That's true in spiritual food too. You need to take in a little bit every single day, and that's our goal for this 20 mile. So our goal is Sonrise for 2020, and can you believe it's 2020? You know, I'm blown away that I think that it should be Barbara Walters going, this is 2020, you know, or something like that, you know. Of course, I remember when Hugh Downs did it, so that makes me a little bit older than all the rest of you, So 1 year in 2020, 4 quarters, 13 weeks at a time, weekly group time on Wednesday, 365 snapshots, goal to cover all the life and teaching of Jesus so that we can know that we have succeeded at the end of the year. This is Amundsen's group standing at the South Pole. By the way, you only see 4 of them. You say 5 of them went. They didn't have any way to take a picture unless one of them held the camera, so one of them never got his picture taken at the South Pole. So what are we using? Let me talk about the materials just for a moment here. We're using the New Living Translation Bible. We're using the Chronological Bible. It's not a Bible you can just find the reference in, but it's a Bible which we talk about it. It's a chronological order. It's a fresh modern translation. One of the reasons I like to use it is because we'll all be using the same Bible, but also because you're used to reading NIVs, King James, Living Bibles, ESV. But when you read the Bible and you use a different translation, it kind of shocks your senses a little bit. It makes you think a little bit harder. All the memory verses, you're going to read some, you're going to go, that sounds familiar. And you look at it and look it up someplace and go, I know that, but all of a sudden it's different for you. Every event and everything Jesus said will be covered in this study if you go with us for this year. We're going to go through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We're going to go over through Galatians, Philippians, Colossians, and that section of Scripture where Paul talks about Jesus. We're going to go to the book of Hebrews and take a big shot because Hebrews says a lot about Jesus. And then we're going to jump to the book of Revelation, and we're going to finish up with where Jesus is now and what the Bible says about what our prospects are in our relationship with Him. So our 2020 focus will be using snapshot journals, the 4 journals covering the teachings of Jesus Christ. January 5th, next Sunday, we're getting started at 2020, and we'll go through January 3rd, 2021. Daily readings and memory verses. This is a personal, daily devotional designed to take you deep into the Word and expand your spiritual life. Now, you can buy them at the church for $5. You can sign up for them. I think I've got still a few coming in that aren't spoken for, but not a lot. This starts next Sunday morning, and I'm giving you this, that next Sunday morning at 9:25, if you want to come at the portable, we're going to cover how to do the journals. So we're going to do one Sunday morning at 9:25, how to do the journals and how to get through them, how to handle them, and hopefully that will help you. For some of you, maybe the journals are needed, but let me tell you what we've got online. This year is better than it has been in the past. January 5th, 2020 is where it's going to start. So this is online. You can go to sonrisechurch.com or sonrisechurch.faith. Go down to where it says Seeking Jesus. Click on the link. It'll take you right to this page. Then it takes us over and tells us what week we're on. The week 1, we're talking about the origin of Jesus. And see right there where it has journal hints. We'll be handing those out in church every week, but you can go online and bring them up. They're there for you to look at. There's a hint for every day of your devotional to help you get started in the thought process. Some of you are going to go like, I don't know what to write down here. Well, I'm going to help you in the process, for your thought process. Right here, if you want to do this online, you don't want to get the Bible, but you want to be able to read them, you can click on every one of the references for that week, and they're available for you. And so they're available online. You can get them on your phones. This is not, for you who understand, not a responsive page, so you have to zoom in or out to make this work for you. Now, if you're using the New Living Translation Chronological Bible, if you go to September 24th, these are the Bible references. And we'll talk about that again next week, but it's easy to do. You open your New Living Translation, September 24th, that's going to be the first week you're in. That's where it's coming from. We have a memory verse, which we'll have right here every week. We'll talk about, and if you'll take those verses, put it on your mirror, put it someplace and read it every single day, it will make a difference for you, because these 52 verses are designed to help you think deeper than you've done before in some of this. 2020, Seeking Jesus, the life and teachings of Jesus. Sunday morning messages are from the week's scripture text, as we talked about. The daily devotion of personal Bible study using Seeking Jesus Snapshot Journal are for you to do every single day. You're participating. Every Wednesday, we'll study the scriptures for the week and look over them, everything that you've done at that particular point. So here's our goal. And I put it up here for you. This year, I will teach and preach through the life of Jesus. We will look at every event in his life and everything he taught, and I believe you'll be surprised sometimes. You will have the opportunity to let Jesus' teachings and example change you and motivate you to be a more committed believer. You will discover the good news delivered by the Son of God for all who want to live a life based on his teachings and example. But let me put it to you. Let's go back to our 20-mile rule. All year long, my goal is to keep you in the Word of God. My goal is to keep you on track. My goal is to say when bad things are happening in your life, tough things are happening, I hope that we can keep you going. But I also want to tell you that if something happens and you have a bad week, when you come to the following Sunday, there's a start over point. This is not like a resolution you do at the beginning of the year and 7 days later you give up and you don't have a starting point. We have starting point after starting point. Every Sunday, every day is a starting point. Every month is a starting point. Every 3 months is a starting point. And finally, at the end of the year, we will have reached our goal and you have gone through the entire teaching of Jesus, and I believe it will change you. A lot of people are following a different Jesus with different spirit and a different gospel. My goal this year is to help you seek and discover the real Jesus, the truth about who Jesus is. So the opportunity is yours. This infomercial is coming to an end. Good news. You can be like Scott, or you can be like Amundsen. This is designed that if you'll follow through and take these little bitty chunks every day and every week, at the end of the year, you will be the one, and it will be our flag raised, and we will be victorious. So my goal is to do the same thing that Amundsen did, to get out in front of you and guide you so we can get there and back in 1 year.